Hello and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here as usual with Jeffrey Poole and Joe Lalo. And we have a guest this week that's first time talking about doing fairy tales, so I think that's going to be kind of fun. Her name is KM Shay. She's going to let us call her Kitty, but if you want to look her up on Amazon, it's KM. And I'm going to read her bio really quickly here. She started writing as a kid, and it became an obsession when she reached college. She's partial to fantasy, but what she really loves is stories that people find humorous, which I enjoy too, so we'll get along just fine. Best part of being an author is connecting with readers. Her passion can't be realized without you, and she genuinely wants to know you and brighten your day. That also goes for podcast listeners. Welcome to the show, Kitty.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I mentioned earlier to you guys, but I'm a long-time listener, so it's kind of like, for me.
Well, it was nice that I think you reached out to us to be on the show, and which happens, it's happening more often now. I think we actually have listeners. It's kind of cool. But, sometimes you never know if people are actually going to have sold any books or anything. Sometimes they just kind of want to publicize themselves, which I understand, any way you can, you gotta do it. But, I was pleasantly surprised when I went to Amazon and I've seen you doing really well with your fairy tales. So why don't you tell us how you got started writing and what drew you to fairy tales?
Well, as you mentioned in my bio, I started writing when I was a kid. I finished my first full-length book when I was in 8th grade, and then between then and college, I wrote about 8 to 10 additional manuscripts, and I tried going the traditional route when I graduated from college, and it just did not work. Like, I did the typical send the stuff out to agents, nothing. So in 2013, I heard about the Kindle Direct Publishing program, so I thought I'd give it a try, and I tried several different genres of fantasy. I really do love fantasy, so pretty much everything I've tried has been in there. And then in December of 2013, on, I guess you could say, a whim, I published a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and it blew up, like, compared to all my other books, way outsold them, and I had the potential to make it a series, so I went with it, and that's my Timeless Fairy Tale series, and they're pretty much what has put me on the map. Well, I guess the reading map, I don't know. They're what let me write full-time, so I'm very fond of them.
Awesome. And is a retelling kind of like you take all the original characters and it's basically the story everyone's familiar with, but you kind of add your own dialogue, or do you make it, what exactly do you do there?
So what I do is I always go back and I look at the original. Whenever I talk to people about what I do, a lot of them picture the Disney retelling, which it's true. Sometimes my stories share elements from the Disney retellings, but I usually try to look at like the way back stuff, which it varies from fairy tale to fairy tale. For instance, Beauty and the Beast is actually relatively new if you compare it to Sleeping Beauty, which has like ancient Egypt has a Sleeping Beauty. A lot of the different cultures have Sleeping Beauty stories. So I generally choose one of the cultures' versions of the story, and I take a look at the theme, because honestly, like the fairy tales, you say characters, but a lot of the times the princesses or the females or like, the miller's daughters don't even have names. Everybody is just referred to by their occupation. And it's more of just like a simplistic story told to get a moral across. So what I usually do is I flesh out the characters a lot more, but I also try to explain some of their bizarre behavior. For instance, with Beauty and the Beast, it always struck me as really weird that Beauty fell in love with the Beast, because it's like that's a little Stockholmy to me. So I got rid of the Beast keeping her captive, and instead I had it so she broke her leg when she fell through a stained glass window in his castle, and so she was stuck there. She couldn't leave. So I try to make the fairy tales a little more exciting and a lot more understandable.
Awesome. And do you do like full-length books, or are they, because I know some of those original fairy tales are only a few pages, if you look in the Brothers Grimm kind of thing.
Yeah, most of my fairy tales are between 60 and 80,000 words. They are full-length books. It can be pretty hard, though, to try and stretch them out, so I usually have to add in a lot of original content.
Cool. And I saw that, I was looking you up last night to see how you've been doing and what you've released, and it looked like the second in your Snow Queen series is out, and it's selling really well. When I took a peek last night, it was like 360 in the whole Amazon store. Is that an original series, or is that like also a fairy tale that you've turned into a series? What is that?
It's also a fairy tale. My timeless fairy tales all belong in one timeline. They all happen within, I think it's about 6 years. I have to bust out my little timeline to get the right number. But they all are taking place at the same time, so each fairy tale is basically a different country. The Snow Queen series takes place centuries before, so instead of putting it in the same series, I decided to break it out and make it particularly because I knew there was no way I was going to be able to do it in one book because of the size of the and scale of the plot I was taking on. So it belongs in the same world, but a different timeline.
Awesome. Is that going to be, how many of them will there be? Because we always, as you know, we always tell people, yeah, if you can write in a series, it's a great way to get the readers to follow along.
Well, that's the great thing about the fairy tales is that I have a lot of leeway. So the timeless fairy tale series that I'm doing right now, it's probably going to be, I think, about 12 or 13 books total. But I'll be able to go back and insert fairy tales that happened way before, like I did with the Snow Queen, and also that happens way after. When I was putting together all possible fairy tales that I really want to do, I think I'm probably going to end up with like 20 to 25 fairy tales, and it doesn't necessarily include splitting them up either. Plus, I'll be honest, readers are always sending me ideas, and they're like, oh, can you do this story? It's my favorite, and nobody's ever done a retelling of it. So there's a lot of material I can draw from.
Cool. Sounds good. I'm going to pass you to the guys to ask a few more questions, and then we'll get into the good marketing stuff a little later.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. My first question is, fairy tales have followed a pretty interesting path through the years. Like in their original forms, they tended to be pretty dark and really cautionary, and eventually they evolved like into the more Disney expectations, where mandatory happy endings, and now more recently, sort of the darkness and depth is starting to creep back in. What's your position on the proper balance of darkness and light with your with fairy tales?
I guess you could say I stand in the middle of the road. I don't necessarily enjoy the dark fairy tales. I really like lighthearted, fun stuff that makes people laugh. But I also feel like if you want a story to have weight and if you want it to be realistic and believable, you need to make sure that the characters have emotional depth. And in order to do that, and in order to really draw out, I guess you could say, the full scope of interaction and like the battles that you can get in the fairy tales, you need to have a villain, like a proper villain. It can't be like a cardboard. It needs to have like serious darkness. So I try to have darker villains, but my heroes have struggles that they face. But everybody's still joking the entire way. Uh, you know, well, you can't take yourself too seriously when you're doing fairy tales. It sounds kind of funny, but you can't. Like when you do Puss in Boots, you have a talking cat. You have to make that funny, otherwise it's just not going to be good.
Yeah, I agree. I think a pit that a lot of people fall into is like people throw around the term grimdark, where like not only like if you're going to do a new version of something, it has to be dark and edgy, and like once you start taking yourself too seriously, like yeah, I think you can sort of make yourself more of a joke by it's almost becomes a caricature of itself. And it's good
Yeah.
to know. Well,
Yeah.
it's good
No.
to know that you're putting more depth in, because I don't know. I have used in the past, I've used the term fairy tale to imply that something is extremely simplified. Like, oh, well, it's sort of a fairy tale version of that, where things are stripped away to basically just a moral dangling off the end of a vestigial story. So yeah, depth is a good thing to add. And again, if you're gonna be writing full-length novels, there's a fair amount to be added.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. You do have to do a lot of improv work, but that's where the fun comes in, though, because that's when the characters can play. And now that I think about it, I definitely do tend to lurk more towards the lighthearted side, but I still like to present real conflict. So
Yeah, it's hard to get invested in a character unless they've got legitimate, concerns and threats.
yeah, I agree. And And that's part of the fun, though, too, is trying to come up with reasons for why all this bad stuff is happening. Because when you read the fairy tale, it's like, wow, this is depressing.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I've noticed this, and again, it's something that you get to add, especially as you say, like characters don't even have names. Like even in the Disney version, you'll end up with Prince Charming. I'm like, surely his last name isn't Charming, you know? So that's the sort of thing where I feel like a lot of them come up short. Even when I was a little kid, I was confused by that.
Yeah, well, and the other thing that really bothers me too is the princes usually don't do anything. Like in the Disney version, Sleeping Beauty is the only one where the prince is at all useful. So it's kind of been my mission to change that, and because it's like, no, if he's really like a hero, he'll do stuff too. So yeah, the guys have names and identities and friends.
Oh wow.
Yeah, real sophisticated here.
See, there you go. Balance. I think balance really is what's missing in a lot of these stories. It's just like, here's our hero, here's our villain, here's what happens at the end. And now it's like, no, it's a whole thing, people.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I part of it probably is that they're kind of like, how parents will skip pages in picture books and be like, okay, book is done, go to bed. Maybe that was why they did it. You don't know.
Yeah. Okay, well, speaking of these changes and additions that you're making, have you run into any problems with purists who didn't like your tales because you didn't tell the story right?
No, I haven't really gotten any flack for that. Usually I actually stick closer to the main story than most writers who do the adaptations. The Snow Queen series that I recently released, that was the biggest departure. And people in general seem to like it. The good thing is, like you mentioned, a lot of the fairy tales are kind of bizarre. So a lot of times people actually welcome it. In my retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, I always kind of felt that it was odd that this creepy little old man who was like, sure, I'll help you for like next to nothing, and then suddenly he's like, oh, I want your firstborn kid, is like, the last thing. That was so weird. So I made a pretty big change, and Rumpelstiltskin is actually the hero in that book, and everybody loved it. I always got a lot of messages when it first came out talking about how they thought it was like the weirdest story ever, and they kind of were wondering why I was even doing it, and then they read it and they thought it was totally awesome. So it's the great thing about everybody doing all these fairy tale adaptations, and like I think it's ABC that has the Once Upon a Time series, is that everybody is extremely comfortable with you departing from the original stuff.
Yeah, that's good to know. And I should have said earlier in my previous question that like injecting logic is a really cool thing, like making it actually make sense. I wrote a story that was essentially my attempt at writing a fairy tale. It was like the second book I wrote, and it was basically the first two acts were just setting up the concept of a girl in the tallest tower guarded by a dragon. Like the whole first 2/3 of the story was just to make that sort of occurrence make sense. And then, whatever, resolution from there. So it's a really fun exercise, if nothing else, even if you're not going to pursue it as a full story. Just try to make all the plot points that we are aware of, fit.
Yeah, I agree.
One more question before I hand you off is, you sort of answered this earlier, but I got to imagine you started with a list of your favorite stories that you were interested in telling. And you said that you've got somewhere on the order of 20 or 25 that you sort of have in mind. So have you ever had any concerns that you might run out of source material, or do you feel that there's more than enough to keep going back to it?
I do feel like there's more than enough, but at the same rate, I guess I'd say I don't want to saturate it. So as I'm writing fairy tales, I'm also trying to get my own original content out there. And those stories do well. The fairy tales are definitely my best sellers at this point, but I do have a couple of other series. There's, in particular, a fantasy romance that I have that's doing as good as a fairy tale, so I'm looking to expand that. And I guess it's kind of the thought of you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, so I'm not really concerned about running out of source material for the fairy tales, but at the same way, I want to expand beyond the fairy tales as well.
It's definitely a good policy. And this is the sort of thing where even though, it can be done well, you could certainly run the risk of being considered sort of a gimmicky or like one trick pony sort of thing if like, oh, well, that's the person that writes fairy tales. Like you sort of, it's good that just like you're adding depth to the stories, you want to add depth to your own career by having a wide range.
I agree. And I'm also, it gets really hard to come up with fairy tale couple after couple because each couple has to be really different. Otherwise, people are going to be like, oh, this is exactly like the pair from Cinderella, and you don't want to run into it. That's like my worst nightmare. So I also have a very vested interest in doing original content just because it's fun to be able to play around with the same characters again.
Oh yeah, definitely. And again, if you start making your couples interchangeable, then you sort of are heading back in the Disney direction where I cannot tell you which story the princes are supposed to be from. I was like, well, there's the mink, and then there's the prince. There is a prince, I'm sure. He's probably got a horse. But yeah, that concludes my questions for this section. So I'm going to hand you off to Jeff now.
Okay.
That's a good answer, by the way. I like that one. Obviously, as you're saying, there are many fairy tales out there, and yeah, there's those little short ones, there's super long ones there. My question for you is, how do you choose which of those stories you'll write about? I mean, are you basing them like all your favorite fairy tales? And of course, I would need to ask is, have you ever decided to like, okay, I really, really hate this one. I hate how it turned out. Let's rewrite it the way it should be written, sort of thing.
Oh goodness, yes, I have done that. I really did not like the original Little Mermaid. You read it, it's depressing. Like, it's just, ugh. So I set out.
That's the problem. Everyone's like has this Disney conceived notion of what these fairy tales are, and they get the book of fairy tales. They're like, "This is not how it happened in the movie." I was like, "Yeah, that's not all fairy tale endings."
Yeah, no, exactly. I read the original Little Mermaid, and I was like, she turns into bubbles? Are you kidding me? So I was definitely going to change that one, and I did. But as for deciding what ones I do, I will be honest, I purposely do the Disney princess ones, but I only do about 1 or 2 of them a year because I'm trying to spread them out because they have the huge flare of popularity. Lindsay mentioned my Snow Queen series. The only reason my Snow Queens, well, I shouldn't say the only reason. One of the reasons why my Snow Queen series really blew up is because of the whole Frozen fever. Disney does a lot of marketing that actually in turn then helps me. So I kind of take that into account when I'm choosing what fairy tales to do. So I try to do at least one mega popular fairy tale per year, and then I usually try to do maybe 2 lesser known ones. And typically it goes by ones that I've been hankering to fix, so to speak, like Rumpelstiltskin. And other times it's just fairy tales that I know and I can see how it would fit into the timeline and into the worlds that I've built. So it just ends up being the right choice for the series itself.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering whether you noticed the popularity of your Snow Queen. I was like, okay, I haven't read the fairy tale, but I'm pretty sure a certain Disney animated movie is based on that particular fairy tale, so I wasn't going to say anything there. Okay, so basing a story off of a beloved fairy tale can be a very daunting task for even the most seasoned of writers, yet you've not only pulled that off, you've got the readers clamoring for more. Have there been any of those fairy tales that you won't touch because of subject matter? Because we all know those don't always have happy endings.
Endings usually don't bother me so much because a lot of the readers know, well, everybody who reads a KM Shay book knows you're going to get a happy ending. It might be a bit of a bittersweet happy ending, or what I would call a more realistic happy ending, so it's not like one of the Disney ones that's going to give you cavities, but everybody will end up happy in my books. Oh my goodness, I forgot where I was going with this. What was the question again? Sorry.
I was curious if there's any fairy tales you won't touch because of either subject matter or else you're like, oh, I just hate this story. I'm never going to bother writing one about it.
That was it. Actually, the fairy tales that I'm reluctant to touch, but I still really want to adapt, are the fairy tales that belong to other cultures. Just because I'm worried I might not give them the honor and the respect that they deserve. For instance, Mulan, I really want to do that one, but I'm a little afraid of attacking it just because it's a part of their culture, and even in a fiction world, I don't want to accidentally mock it. I actually speak Japanese, so there's been some Japanese fairy tales that I really enjoy, but even though I know a lot about the culture, I'm still a little reluctant to even think about adapting them just because it can be tricky. Doing that.
Was Mulan Japanese or Chinese?
Mulan was Chinese, but Japan has a bunch of really fun fairy tales. and it also has some fun history stuff. There's actually a female samurai warrior who was an excellent horseman, and I really want to do a story about her. Oh my gosh. But it still scares me, just the fact that I might accidentally butcher their culture.
So you just want to make sure you do it the story credit without really irritating a whole nation full of people that were like, you took our sacred fairy tale, we're going after you. But, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do have to admit, a lot of readers are willing to forgive. I have a Robin Hood and a King Arthur series, and I am incredibly impressed with how tolerant my United Kingdom readers are, because they actually like those books, and I'm kind of like, really? I'm pretty sure I butcher the way you talk, so, but they're still willing to read them, so I guess there's that. But yes, in general, I'm a little frightened about doing that.
What would you say would be the most difficult part of writing stories based on fairy tales? I mean, if you knew then what you know now, would you make any changes?
To be honest, writing fairy tales actually is almost easier than writing a book with your own source material. I mean, you still have to come up with the characters and like the plot and everything, but one of the reasons I feel like it's easier to adapt fairy tales and end up with a wonderful book is because the characters have very clear desires. Like, they arrive with that. Unless you're going to really radically change the story, you know that they're going, like Cinderella wants to go to the ball. Each fairy tale heroine has something that she inherently is trying to accomplish. And that is actually, I feel like, what makes them such good stories and easier to write than your typical book. As for looking back, this is like a little random, but I would say I would have gotten an editor much sooner if I were able to talk to my younger self. It's like, get an editor now! Because I look back at Beauty and the Beast, my first one, and I compare it to Snow Queen, and it's like, oh. I don't want to say it's bad because I still love it, but I have 2 editors, and they're brilliant, and I love them, and I can see how the books that I wrote before them really could use their help.
Well, I think everybody can do that. I look at my first one, I'm like, oh my god, I so need to go back and clean that up. But then I've had readers that say that you can see, following through my stories, like, okay, he's gotten so much better with each one. Like, you learn from the mistakes. Well, the mistakes would be those reviews saying, dude, what the hell? You need to fix this, this, and this. But oh well, what can you say? All right, let me hand you back over to Lindsay. She's got some marketing questions for you.
Okay.
All righty. First off, I have to say that I didn't really say it before, but I've been surfing around in your fairy tales and folklore category here on Amazon, and I'm like, this is the best category because it's kind of like steampunk. When I first found steampunk, it's, like the first couple books sell really well. Those are yours. And it takes about 5,000 sales ranking right now to get into the top 20, so it's not super competitive. And I think it was like 45,000 to get into the top 100. So I just think, wow, it's so hard to find a category like that on Amazon anymore. Did you look and see like, oh, I can own this fairy tales category, or was it just luck that you were really into fairy tales and wanted to do the retellings?
It was a little bit of both. So I guess when I first started the series, I didn't really realize what a wonderful creation I had come up with. Or I shouldn't say I'd come up with, I'd stumbled upon, really. It was more like it. Now that I'm much more experienced, I can see that there are major advantages to it. I can't say I exactly set out looking for it, but it is a wonderful section, and you are right. It has enough what I would call well-known authors that you actually get quite a bit of click traffic through it, but it still doesn't have a lot of I hesitate to say competition because I hate it when people say that about books. Maybe it doesn't have a lot of just other authors there in general, and there aren't a lot of new releases coming out. Like right now, pretty much the only ones releasing anything in that category are myself, and I think her name is Marissa Myers. She does the Lunar Chronicles series, and she just finished it. So now it's just me for now. I'm sure there will be another author releasing something in there soon, but yeah.
All right, yeah, it's great if you can find something like that because you do have the visibility for people who are just surfing through the categories, but in some other categories we do like urban fantasy and stuff. It takes like top 1,000 sales ranking just to make it in the top 100 of that category or something crazy. All right. For fairy tales, do you know who your typical reader is? Is it like a fantasy fan or someone who grew up reading fairy tales? I'm just curious.
Well, my reader is a little different because I'm a young adult author, but a lot of my readers actually aren't young adults. A lot of them are about my age, so in their 20s. Although the great thing about being a fairy tale author and the other thing that I haven't really mentioned is I try to make my stories very, I don't want to necessarily say family friendly because I don't think they'd be rated G, but they're clean, I guess you could say. That's one of the things I'm really well known for, is having clean books. So I get a lot of multi-generational readers, like mothers and daughters who read them together, and then sisters and a lot of friends who share it. So I'd say the majority of my readers are females, and a lot of them are fairy tale fans, but my core readers, the ones who are really passionate and who read everything I have, they just usually like actually lighthearted and funny books that are with clean romance. That's what they're looking for.
All right. And it looks like you mentioned before that you've turned them into a series, the Timeless Fairy Tale series. I assume they're not really related beyond the fact that they're fairy tales. Do you find that it still works to get people to kind of read on to the next one, even though there's not like a cliffhanger or, it's not the same characters and that kind of thing?
It almost works better because people are more willing to pick up a series if they can just jump right into the middle and they know that they aren't going to feel totally left out. So a lot of people will join in because I end up writing a particular fairy tale that they're interested in, and then after that they're like, oh, that was a lot of fun, and I'm kind of curious about the world now, so I think I'm going to go back and read them all. So it actually works to my advantage.
All right, and one thing I was thinking of too when you were saying that you're the only one kind of releasing books in that category right now is, that's another thing for our listeners to look for, is sort of those categories that are underserved by traditional publishing, where there's a readership, but maybe traditional publishing isn't touching them because, you're not going to sell 100,000 copies of these probably. But as an indie author, you don't need to sell that many to do really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually hoping we'd be able to talk about this because I feel like you're an excellent example of it as well with steampunk. And I feel like a lot of people, when they first are coming into the whole authorship thing, they concentrate more on the story. But if you actually look at what genre you're going into and you do your research, you can find a genre like fairy tales or like steampunk, and you can dominate it, and it's a lot of fun then.
Yeah, I think a lot of us start out that way. We just want to tell the story that we want to tell, and then you're trying to figure out where can I put this that it might actually get noticed. And if you can actually think like a publisher, right, and kind of go surfing around and look for these categories that are maybe underserved by traditional publishing, it's definitely going to be an easier road for sure.
Absolutely. And a lot of readers actually are looking for like niche kind of stuff that you're exactly right, traditional publishers would never get into just because it's not cost effective for them. But those kind of readers exist. So I guess one way of looking at it too is if you're interested in it, I'm pretty sure that other people are interested in it too. That's one of the reasons why I love my readers so much, because it's like, you get me.
Yeah, and I think you've got even more of an advantage because you've got Disney and over here, and there's some other retellings going on. So it's like you're getting, like you were saying, you're kind of getting some free marketing. I'm still waiting for a giant steampunk thing. Maybe Disney can do something to help me out.
When Disney announced that they were doing a live-action version of Beauty and the Beast and Cinderella, I did like the Hallelujah chorus. It was like, yeah, this is what I waited for. That was actually why I moved up my Snow Queen series too. Originally, I was going to release it in a couple of years, but it was kind of like, Frozen Fever is only going to last so long, so I better take advantage of it while I can.
All right, no, that's really smart. I love it. Okay, it looks like you're in Kindle Unlimited, KDB Select with everything. Have you been from the beginning, or have you experimented at all? What are your thoughts on that right now?
Before my Timeless Fairy Tale series, I did kind of try to go wide. I really do enjoy, for now, the Kindle Unlimited because it does make it a lot easier, actually, to dominate. In some ways, the traditionally published books, like the Marissa Meyer's ones, find it really hard to compete with page reads because Amazon will weight your ranking due to the page reads. I don't know if I'd necessarily stay with it forever. I know it's really nice for my readers, and I get a lot of readers that way because they'll look at my books and they'll be like, oh my, she has 23 books in Kindle Unlimited. I think I'll just buy a subscription and then like read everything she has over 2 months. So it works out really great for them, and that's important to me as well. I enjoy it, and I work with a financial analyst, so I do have some percentages if you guys are interested in that, based on like how much extra I make with the Kindle Unlimited system. But I know eventually I probably really should go wide just because it's not smart to have all your eggs in one basket. But the whole tax thing and accounting thing, it's like, a lot of work.
I know. I think I got like 20 1039s or something this year, although half of them were for Amazon because they split it. I think this year they gave you one for every single country they're in. But okay, well, no, tell us your numbers that you teased us with. Were you just comparing going wide versus being in KU?
Well, the numbers aren't perfect because I was a lot less known before. Like when I tried going wide, it just didn't work. But my financial analyst, he's a friend of mine, so he actually looks at other numbers that other authors have published and kind of goes based off of industry averages instead. So I believe for the average writer who goes wide, Amazon makes about, I think it's 60 to 70% of their income, I think is the guess. I don't know that for sure. But since I get 100% of my income from Amazon, it's then divided out between obviously page reads and book sales. And Kindle Unlimited actually does cannibalize some of your book sales. My analyst says he thinks I get about, I think it's a 25 to 30% loss of sales. However, the Kindle Unlimited page reads are then 60 to 70% of my revenue. So when you add it up, he said, varying from month to month, it ends up being an additional 30 to 40% of income. So it is a very significant source of income. Like the Kindle Unlimited program is very big right now.
Yeah, I've definitely tried it out with my pen name, and if you're able to kind of keep in the top 100 of a category, and it helps you because you get that boost in the sales ranking, yeah, you can definitely make extra. You know, I did like a BookBub ad and made like an extra 5,000 or 6,000 that month just on this omnibus that I had in KU that, you know, usually my pen name doesn't make huge money because I'm not doing that much stuff with them. But yeah, those page reads, if you happen to be hot on something that month, it's like, wow.
Yeah, and I have gotten into the All-Star program, which helps a little bit, the Kindle Unlimited All-Star program. But in general, like it's been great, and I'm really happy with it because I feel like that also is what gives me a lot of exposure just with the fairy tales because it's a lot of work. Like, I mean, I don't know if you guys have bought the Kindle Unlimited subscriptions, but it's a lot of work to find like books that you really want to read. So that's part of, I think, why my books are so popular on Kindle Unlimited is because they're like, I could, you know, like spend an hour trying to find a new book to read, or I could just read another fairy tale, which I know will at least make me laugh. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Nice. Alrighty, last kind of question for me before I hand you to the guys. I was kind of looking at the covers and what's done in the fairy tale category, at least on Amazon, and it looks like they're kind of quite a few, like no real dominant style stood out to me. It looked like it was mostly Photoshop manipulation kind of stuff rather than custom artwork. How did you go about decide, or what do you do, and how did you decide that was the way to go?
I have a cover artist. She goes by, her online name is Merlin, and she's the best. I love her so much. She only does artwork for me too, so it's like, oh, what of a kind. But so she actually has done a lot of research, and originally we were pushing covers that didn't necessarily have people on them, but if you're going to do a fairy tale, if you're going to do YA, actually, because the fairy tale books kind of follow more of the YA process, absolutely make sure you have a girl, preferably a girl in a flowy dress on them. It's kind of like the year or the decade of the flowy dresses, I guess you could say. It's having the person on it is probably the biggest thing. You can get away with other things like the Lunar Chronicles, I think usually have like, you know, a slipper or a mirror. But in general, if you look at the fairy tale authors who have done well in the past, traditionally everybody has a teenage female on their cover.
All right, that does seem to be true in YA because there was a sci-fi series last year or 2 years ago, YA, that did really well, and there was a girl in a flowy dress in front of like a field of stars, and I'm like, okay, is this science fiction or are we going to a ball? I don't know, but it sold really well, so I guess that's the secret.
Yeah, that's pretty much like I think the traditional publishers saw that and were like, oh, we could copy that, and now like pretty much every series in young adult has a girl with a flowy dress, even if she never actually wears a flowy dress in the book. That's just a thing. So yeah, I always make sure that I stuff my girls though in dresses, just because it's like the covers don't have to be perfect depictions of them, but I feel at least if I'm gonna put them on a dress, they should like be in a dress in the book at some point.
She was in it for 3 sentences on page 83, so you're covered. All right, I did actually have one more quick question about KU. Some people have been complaining because recently it took a pretty big hit. I think was it January? It went down from like 0.5 cents a page to 0.4 cents a page, around that. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think you'll stick with the program if it keeps going down? How much you're earning per page is read, or?
The rate lowering wasn't quite as alarming as it was on February 1st. They actually adjusted the number of pages each book is. So for instance, I had a couple of fairy tales that went from being 450 pages to like 380 pages or something like that, which is a pretty significant cut. When I'd gone through everything with my analyst, he said I think across the board I had like a 14 to 12% decrease in pages. And if Amazon doesn't raise the rate, the payout per page, that is really going to hurt. That's actually going to hurt more than just letting the rate drop a little bit. I think what everybody is speculating Amazon is going to do now is they will raise the rate back to like half a cent per page now that the pages have been corrected, and they'll slowly lower it again as basically kind of a way to appease us. Keeping this in mind, though, I kind of am thinking that eventually I will cycle out of Kindle Unlimited. However, I might not necessarily leave it altogether. And what I mean by that is, since the fairy tales do so well in Kindle Unlimited, I think what I would plan on in the future, what I'm planning is maybe I would leave them in Kindle Unlimited for 1 3-month cycle when they first come out, and then I would pull them out. And I'd make sure like all my readers knew, so that way if they had the chance to read in Kindle Unlimited before it left, they got it and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm kind of hesitating to cast judgment on it until I find out what the February numbers are. It is a little alarming, but I also know that Amazon is making a big push through the Kindle Scout program to try and get good books into the Kindle Unlimited program. So it's something they're invested in. They're not going to abandon it, especially because it is, I think, pretty popular.
Yeah, and that does seem like something they would do. Like, everybody's freaking out, we lowered the rate, and then, oh, it's up again. And so it's like, you'll always see on keyboards like, oh, I'm getting out of there, I'm totally getting out of there, I'm ditching them. And like the same people are still in it the next month when this comes up and they're complaining. I'm like, well, you're still in it, so I guess it's working out okay in the end.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, they are pretty good. I don't know exactly when I think it was when they usually give you the opportunity to leave if they make like a big drastic change. So I think I'll probably sit tight for now, but I'll definitely be looking and going wide, hopefully in the next year or two.
All right, cool. Thanks for answering my questions. I'm going to pass you to Joe.
Yep. I was just thinking as the discussion was going on about how, like, it starts with a certain amount of reward and then changes, and typically people would call that a bait and switch. But it strikes me that when does bait ever lead to anything good? Like, I think that's pretty straightforward what bait is. So that's just a bait and the trap that the bait was leading you to.
Yeah, no, you're probably right.
All right, so that's my actual question. This is what happens when I go off list. I just don't really have an end to the point. All right, your bio mentions that you enjoy connecting with your readers. What's your preferred method for doing so?
I don't know if I necessarily have, well, the way I'm most active is usually Facebook and my website. Those are the two that I'm on there a lot. I try to get back to everybody a lot. I try to get back to Twitter, but I'm not that good about tweeting. I'm a very bad example. Don't follow my example on Twitter because I'm really bad. I'm usually like, hey, there's a new book out. And otherwise, I don't say anything unless somebody says something to me. If they do say something to me on Twitter, I make an effort to respond. But yeah, my website and Facebook are my favorite just because they provide, I kind of feel like, the most organic experience. So like when I launched Puss in Boots on Facebook, we were all like swapping cat photos. It was a lot of fun. And then on my website, that tends to be the people who are more like speculating about like, oh, where's the series gonna go? What are we gonna, like, oh, what are you gonna do with this other series and that kind of thing. Otherwise, a new connection point, I guess you could say, I've tried is Instagram, it's been actually pretty fun, but I do feel a little bit of the pressure because it's like, oh, people are gonna actually look at this photo. I have to make sure it looks good, and I have to make sure I don't look like death warmed over. So it's fun, but a little more pressure filled. I do have a newsletter like every other author, but and I try to do fun stuff with them too, but I mostly try to not annoy those people because I feel like those are the people where if they just want to hear if I have a new book coming out, that's like the easiest place for them to sign up and find out. So I just keep it to once a month, and I try to make it short as possible and have fun things in it for them.
I think it's definitely a good policy. It's sort of interesting how the nature of social networks are like they are good for certain things, and Facebook is good for like medium length things and a lot of interaction, and then like I mean it's not social media, but like websites are much more I want to say substantial, and then Twitter is tiny little things, and really depending on how you want to communicate is which social network works for you.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'm not good at limiting myself to like 140 words. That's why Twitter's such a push for me.
Yeah, yeah. I can't use Instagram just because unless they've changed it since I last encountered this issue, I am incapable of producing a sentence without a typo in it, and they don't really let you go back and edit the description that you put to fix the error, so now you have to delete it and make a new one, and it's just a recipe for disaster for me.
Yeah, autocorrect always picks mine up, so I'm always like make, and it's like ma kike, and it's like no, delete. It's challenging, but it still is fun though.
Yeah, I tend to have a fair amount of art, and I always forget because it's a little bit trickier to share art that way than it is just to share photos that way.
Yeah, I've gotten art on there too, and I'm like, how do I retweet this or reshare it? I don't know. That's the one problem with being involved with a lot of them. You're kind of like, which one am I on now? How do you do this? Google, help me. But.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we talked a little bit about this. My next two questions have somewhat been covered, but we'll dig a little bit deeper, I suppose. There's been an uptick in grown-up and semi-grown-up fairy tale movies and TV shows. And Maleficent is one, and we mentioned Once Upon a Time and Grimm. So, do you feel that's driven some fans in your direction?
I don't know. Typically, actually, when I know I have like fans of fairy tales, they actually generally mention Robin McKinley's beauty, and I think, how would I explain this? So I don't know if they've necessarily driven people to me, but on the Switch side, like I went and I saw the live-action version of Cinderella and Maleficent, and then I went on Facebook and I was like, hey guys, have any of you seen this? What do you think? And everybody responded. So, I mean, that is the fun thing about my readers, my core readers, is that they have the same interests as me. I love my if I gush about them, but yeah, they have the same interests as me, so I don't know if those particular mediums necessarily drove people to my stuff as much as it might just be something they're interested in. However, the title recognition helps a lot, so I'm going to return back to the Snow Queen and say, like, if I had released that series before Frozen came out, it would not have the recognition that it does. So I'm not sure if people, like, necessarily go out and look at the movie and be like, oh, I really want to, like, see retellings, as much as it is that they just see, like, my fairy tales on the list, and they're like, oh, yeah, maybe it'd be interesting to see another take on it. So it's kind of hard to guess. Sorry, that wasn't a very good answer.
No, it makes a lot of sense. It's sort of a correlation versus causation thing. Like, it's not so much that those things existed and then made them look for your stuff. It's that the sort of person who likes that stuff would also like your stuff. So like yeah, it makes sense that you wouldn't necessarily see a direct result like point A point B relationship between them. You say at the very least your fans are familiar with a lot of this stuff. Have you seen any like factions form between people who are fans of some and not the other?
Nope. Typically, we just get in discussions. We had a very intense discussion on Cinderella's prince, like when Cinderella came out. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. But it's like people just discuss. I don't really see sides at all. What I do get is I get people who are timeless fairy tale fans, then I get people who are fans of my King Arthur series, and then I'll get people who are fans of an original series that I have, the MBRC series, and they're all clamoring for the next book. They're like, okay, you have to write for us next. And it's like, no, us first. And that's pretty cute and funny, but that's really the most division that I see in them.
Yeah, that's a risk that you run when you have multiple series that don't have strong overlap. Is it's like, well, I just want like these are the books I want, and I like your books that are like this. So please make more books like this. Like I definitely see some of that amongst my I've got steampunk, sci-fi, and fantasy, and whatever I'm writing, it seems like the people I'm hearing from want the other thing to be written next. You know, like I can't align with my readership. It's good, by the way, to know that you have a very civil readership. Then, because I know that a lot of other people there would be lots of arguments amongst each other.
Yeah, I actually am lucky. I know I mentioned earlier that like there's a couple of things that you can find in every single one of my books, and that's humor and strong female protagonists, because I hate the weepy ones. Oh my gosh. And then a cleaner read. So like, I mean, I have some swearing and stuff like that, but it's going to be pretty family friendly. So what I usually get are actually people who are looking for one of those three things. And I actually have, like, I mean, I don't really know for sure, but I think I actually have a pretty good amount of cross sales. My fairy tale series is obviously my most popular, so there's lots of people that buy that don't necessarily look up my other stuff. But I know I have a lot of readers who read everything, or I even have readers who read half of my stuff, and then they're like, okay, I'm not interested in the rest of her stuff, and then they'll like go try to read something else, then they'll come back because they're like, oh man, I can't find anything. And one of the other series ends up being their favorite. But what happens is they always have one specific favorite. So the fairy tales are their favorite, or the King Arthur series is their favorite, and they're really, really passionate about that, which I love. I mean, it's a lot of fun, and it's very fulfilling, I guess you could say, as a writer, but I also kind of feel like then I get pulled in multiple directions because it's like, I don't know which one I should do.
Yeah, it's tricky. You're trying, like, you want to please everybody, but when there's mutually exclusive requirements from the readership, you start worrying that you're just going to cater to the loudest voices, which is sometimes dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and my people are very understanding, so if I do kind of explain to it, they know that my timeless fairy tales are what pays the bills, so they know that I'm going to write 3 of those a year. So yeah, they're very understanding about it, but there's books that I'll still have people be like, psst, are you going to write a sequel to that one? And it's like, no, I'm not. Sorry.
Yeah, I have like listeners of the show will know the superhero story I have that nobody has really read. There's at least 2 fans that are desperately waiting for the sequel to that. And I'm like, you're the only 2. I'm gonna sell 2 copies of that book if I write it. So it's unfortunate. The last question really has been answered, but I'll just restate it in case you want to add anything to it. How much does the relative popularity of a fairy tale factor into your subject selections? Like you were saying, you sort of moved up Snow Queen because you knew that Frozen was so popular. Like, do you see any more examples of that on the horizon?
Well, Disney is doing a lot of live action ones, so I actually didn't see Cinderella move. Like, I had my Cinderella book out well before the Cinderella live action version, and that actually didn't move very much as a result. The one thing I would say, though, and this is just general advice to anybody who's looking not necessarily to writing fairy tales, but writing adaptations, absolutely make sure that you include a reference to the original story in your title or in your series title. So if you're going to do, like, Sherlock in space, say, like, Sherlock and, like, I don't know, whatever, in the series title. I think it was Jeff who asked me if there was a fairy tale I hated and I'd redone, and I said yes, The Little Mermaid. I redid it as The Little Selkie, and my financial I hate that word. My financial analyst. I got it. My financial analyst never fails to assure me that if I had actually stayed with the Little Mermaid and hadn't renamed it like Little Selkie and redone it as Little Selkie, it would have done much better than it did. It still did good, but he reminded me that the title recognition would have been much more powerful. I don't regret it just because I hate that story so much. But for a lot of people starting out in this kind of thing, absolutely make sure that you include the title, like the original work, in your title or in the series title.
That makes a tremendous amount of sense. I mean, again, people are into this stuff because they're into it, and you sort of don't want to make it a riddle for them to figure out what they'll be getting when they open the book.
Yes, exactly. Well, and then that's also what attracts a lot of people to your initial book. Like, I mean, we can jokingly say it's the foofy dresses, but I know a lot of the time people just see, oh, Beauty and the Beast, like, I'll check that one out. So.
Yep. All right. Well, that concludes my questions now. So we'll send you off to Jeff for the last set.
Alrighty. So, of all the advertising you do, what do you think that you could be doing more of that could be helping you out?
I'm going to be honest, I have never actually paid for any kind of advertising at all. Never done a book for bad, nothing. So I should probably start that, maybe. That'd be good.
Hey, if you're doing that well and you don't need it, that's even more power to you.
Well, and this is where I was really hoping that I get a chance to mention this, where title recognition works for me a lot, but it's also my readers, which, by the way, I know I'm going to post a link to this eventually, and they'll definitely see this, so hi, guys! But I'm really lucky to have a passionate group of readers who go out there and try to win over new readers for me. And I don't mean like they just try to get a person who's like going to read one or two books. They're looking for somebody who's just as passionate as them. So they will like dog their sisters, their friends, and they really, I feel, are responsible for expanding my readership. Between them and the title recognition, those are probably my two strongest. I don't want to call them marketing tools because my readers are not tools, but probably strengths.
Word of mouth.
So, I'm sorry, what was that?
Word of mouth, essentially, right?
Yes, exactly. I think the other thing, though, that I will continue to use that is extremely helpful is I do a lot of free stuff on my website. Like if you go to my free section, I have at least probably 100 or 200 pages of free stuff, and it's a lot of fun for me, but it's also a great way for readers to continue to interact, and it's kind of like a way I can show my appreciation to them. So like for Mother's Day, I release like a little 3-page short from one of my series, and I always give them like a Christmas gift. And this year I didn't have enough time because I was working on my second Snow Queen book, but I usually give them like a Valentine's Day gift and stuff like that. And that actually really helps to create a good rapport between me and my readers, and it also keeps them invested in the series, I guess you could say, so they want more and they know that there's more to the story, and it's great. I love it.
Yeah, what I usually do to actually interact with my fans is I'll say, hey, I need the name of a dragon. Who wants to name a dragon? I'll even go so far as you give me a good description. I very well could use it. And then I'll put their name at the end of the book, and now I've got them say, oh, I helped write a book. Go ahead and check this book out. And they, word of mouth works great, especially for me. So I can sympathize.
Yeah, well, you do lighthearted fantasy too, so it's just us. No, joking.
All right, so newsletters. You mentioned you actually have one. What do you typically do if you'd like to increase your subscriber count? Do you offer incentives or anything like that?
I'm actually one of the rare authors where I wouldn't say my focus is actually on my newsletter. My focus is more just making sure that they connect with me somehow. So I try to get people to subscribe to newsletters, but I also try to get them to sign up for my website or for Facebook, because if you sign up for any of those or for Twitter, I'll make sure that like if I send out a new free short that all of those different social media sources, I don't know, will be notified. But I also try to do a bunch of fun stuff. So I'll do reader opinion polls in January. I try to do this every January. I did like, what's your favorite hero archetype, and what archetype would you most like me to write? That was really interesting, and that's really useful too for market research, I guess you could say, because it lets me know what they're looking for. Where was I going? I'm sorry, my train of thought just went like way off the tracks. Let me call it back here.
Newsletters.
So, yes, newsletters. As I mentioned before, I mostly just try not to irritate those people, so I keep them short. But, and it's kind of what I mentioned before with my readers, I don't want to say I bribe them, but they know I bribe them, so I'll fess up to it. I bribe them with free stuff all the time. So it's mostly I try to get them just to remember me, and I make it so at the end of every single one of my books, I say if you're interested like in a free short story or an extra scene about this book, go to my website, kmshay.com, and a lot of people will go to my website as a result. Like, I think my statistics are usually, I think I get like 500 visitors a day. Higher if I've just released a book, and all that traffic is coming as a result of the link in that book because they all want to get the extra freebie and the extra chapter. And usually once they come, then they're like, oh, look at all this other like cool stuff, and hey, look, she wants to know, you know, like what kind of other stuff do I read, and that's where connecting with readers is really important. And I just feel like if I reach out for them, they're very good about responding.
Yeah, one thing I've learned is fans like getting something for free. I did the same thing where I offered a free short story for as an incentive for signing up, and the amount of subscribers just went. So it was a good idea. So, all right. So my last question actually had to do with marketing, and said you mentioned you haven't done anything yet. So my modified question would now be is if you're thinking about getting ready to jump into marketing, what did you say you were looking to do here? Like maybe get like a BookBub ad, or what? How would you think you'd start out?
I honestly don't know. Like, I mean, I know from listening to a lot of these podcasts is that it seems like BookBub is the way to go, but I don't know if it is for a niche author like me, especially because I'm young adult. BookBub has a pretty small young adult section. I've heard Facebook is pretty good in terms of doing ads if you can get them right. I actually have had quite a bit of luck where I'll do a free story. I don't do this anymore because if I offer a book for free for a day, it's usually just for my readers, so I'll just tell my readers and then they'll spread the word. But previously, when I was first trying to get traction, I'd put a book up for free for 5 days, and there's lots of different websites that you can list your books on when they're free. And so I'd try to get like 5 different websites for each day and stagger them, and that way I'd get a lot of downloads. I'm not necessarily sure, though, if any of those downloads really turned into anything. To be honest, I think this is where Kindle Unlimited actually does a lot of the heavy pushing for me, and Amazon does a lot of the pushing now because I kind of have like a proven track record. They do a lot of marketing for me, and because Kindle Unlimited is a much smaller pool of books, it's a lot easier to rise to the top, and once you're there, it's a lot easier to stick. So I actually, if we're talking about marketing, I would say I recommend that new authors do go into Kindle Unlimited, maybe not forever, maybe just for a year, but it's a good way to get your stuff out there as quickly as possible with as little other distractions, I guess you could say, or possibilities to distract other possible readers. I use possible a lot, sorry.
No comprendo. But all right, so KU, just for new authors starting out, good to know. All right, let us hand you back over to Lindsay, and I think she'll try and wrap things up.
I would, but I did have a couple more questions that occurred to me while you were
Of course she does. Fire away, Lindsay.
All right. Actually, I think some readers might be wondering if, like, when you use The Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast in the title, could you explain, like, when it's okay to use? I mean, I know these are back in the public domain at this point, but like, I assume you've kind of looked into like what's the cutoff date where it's okay to base something on something that already exists without getting sued.
Yeah, no, that is very important to me. Fairy tales are like pretty much all in the clear. I think it's like some point in the 1920s, so actually half of Sherlock you can use, the other half you can't. But so you can do Sherlock, like, you know, Pride and Prejudice obviously you can use. So pretty much anything before 1920s is safe. If you're really wondering, I'd say Google it. But anything that's, I kind of want to say old-timey, so, you know, like Julius Verne, like Around the World in 80 Days, all the classic books, which really, like, that's what you want. You want the older stuff that has the title recognition, because that's insta, oh, I know what that is, and that's marketing for you right there without you having to pay for anything.
Right, I'm sure it helps if people are just like, I love Beauty and the Beast and the TV series from the 80s, and I want more Beauty and the Beast, and they just Google it, and hey, here's this book by KM Shay. Let me give it a try.
Yeah, it does help a lot too, especially because a lot of like the fairy tales are in the also bots. So I don't know what I'm like who's where right now, but if you look at the also bots, like I think for a while Robin McKinley was on my also bots for Beauty and the Beast, because that's, we kind of share audiences, and this was why when I mentioned earlier I don't like the term competition. It's because just because somebody buys like your book, Lindsay, doesn't mean they're not going to buy mine. So just because somebody buys Robin McKinley's book does not mean they're not going to buy mine. So I'm more like, yes, I love Robin McKinley. Let's talk about her and get her up in my Google search terms. Then I will pop up then. But man, I'm sorry, my thoughts derail a lot on this thing.
No, that's all right. That's because you're reading our chat over on the side, and that's where all the action is.
It's fun, I have to admit. There's been a time or two where it's like I'm trying not to laugh, but.
All right. One last question. This is actually a bonus tip for those listening, because I was actually grabbing your website for the show notes, and I saw your top post on here that you're offering freebies for every 25 reviews you get on, I guess it's the first Snow Queen book. I think that's a great idea. Could you have you done that before, or how's that going?
Yeah, my model has changed over the time as Amazon has changed their review policy, because I don't want to get slapped for being naughty with that. So initially, I just offered straight up, like, if you review it, I'll give you an extra chapter. But then Amazon changed their review policy, so now instead of offering, I guess you could say, individuals, it's where I'll just offer, if Beauty and the Beast gets, well, it's not Beauty and the Beast, it's Sacrifice, book 2, Snow Queen. If Sacrifice gets, like, every 25 reviews it gets from any of the Amazon pages, because I do have a lot of overseas readers, and then also on Goodreads, because I'm pretty active on Goodreads. That's another one I failed to mention in social media. Sorry, put a pin in that. Goodreads is also great. But yes, so for every 25 reviews I get on like one of those sources, I will then unlock a new freebie, and that's also partially why I have so many freebies in my freebie library of my website, because I create all this extra content for readers, and it's fun because it gives me a chance to write stuff that doesn't necessarily fit in the book, but that I still wanted to address eventually. So I guess it's kind of a bribe to get my readers to review, and they know that reviewing is important, and they really like the free stuff, so they write wonderful reviews. Like, they'll actually put like a lot of time and effort into it. The one thing that I do stress is that I want honest reviews, so I don't want someone just like being like, it's amazing, if they didn't think it was amazing, because I really want to hear about what people thought about the book, because I actually don't read many of the reviews. Merlin, my cover artist, she'll actually read all of them. Like, I read them for like the first 2 weeks, and then after that, Merlin reads them, and then she'll tell me, like, oh, you really should read this one. They had a very good point, or this one was really encouraging. You should read that. And I try. There's some readers that I know by name, and I'll always read their reviews just because it's fun, and they're very good at calling me on stuff that I maybe didn't do so well, or I'm pointing out something that I could improve on, or something that I did really great on that I want to remember so I do it again.
Cool. Well, it sounds like a great idea. Now I wish that I'd done this. I did like a 4 bonus scenes a couple months ago on my blog. I should have said, like, hey, you'll get the next one when I hit whatever 50 reviews. But I may do that in the future. I like that idea. Yeah. Especially with like.
Sorry, go ahead.
Because like you were saying, you'd have to be careful with Amazon because they're very specific that you can only give away review copies of a book. You can't like promise future books or anything like that to get reviewers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of it too, I think, is just now that I've done this so much with my reviewers, they know that the reviews are important, so they're going to do them anyways, but I just like to share the wealth, because a lot of the times, as I mentioned, I write this stuff anyways, because it's like I can't get the characters out of my head, so I'll share it.
All right, great. Well, it's been a lot of really good information today, and I hope people appreciate it. And I hope we don't you'll probably get like 100 new people publishing in your little category, and you'll be like, dang, my secret is out.
Well, I'll have like, hopefully like 6 months before everybody floods it, because it takes them that long to write a book. But yeah, we'll find out. Otherwise, go to the auction. It's small.
You told Lindsay all about it. She's been like, okay, give her like 30 days and she'll have something released.
Oh, you're safe. I'm not really that into fairy tales unless there's really catchy Disney singing going on. And
that'd be kind of hard to recreate.
That'd be hard to write.
Somebody should try that. That would be awesome to have like characters break out in song in the middle of the story. I have no idea how you do that, but that would be worth it.
Come on, don't they have that wingding font that has some musical notes in there? You could throw that in there and you could try to like, okay, sung to the tune of. So.
Way above my skill level.
Oh, that's so funny. I don't think Amazon would let you keep the formatting, actually. Like, I mean, seriously considering this, I don't think they'd let you keep that. I think they automatically change it or something like that. So, I don't know. You'd have to... I know you could, like, put little, like, JPEGs in there of little notes. That'd work.
Oh, there you go. See, there's a way.
That's way too much work for me, so I'm going to stick with my fantasy categories. But, all right, let's finish up here. Why don't you let people know where they can find you online? And is there any particular book of yours that people love and they should check out?
Well, so you can find me at kmshay.com. Otherwise, just search KM Shay. Like, it pops up everywhere now. I would, if you're going to start some stuff, I'd recommend the 2 Snow Queen books, just because those are the highest quality that I have, and I feel like they're like the pinnacle. So, yeah, just if you read those and you like them, go into the other books with lower expectations, because they're not like that.
All right, cool. Well, we all got to start somewhere, and it's good to know which ones to check out. All right, thank you for joining us tonight. It was great talking to you.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. You guys lived up to my expectations. You're just as witty, and I don't know if this is real life, in web space as you have sounded on the internet before. I don't know. It's late.
Witty? Hold on a sec. I need to turn on a recorder. Hang on.
She's talking about Joe, because Joe uses those vocabulary words.
Okay. Yeah, $25 words are for the win.
All right, we better cut off the recording before we get any sillier.
So long, everybody.
Bye, guys.
See you guys later.
Thanks.